Oh, yeah.
Yes!
You know what time it is.
Boom shakalaka!
Raptors Republic. Time to call the doctor, son.
The doctor is in.
Phdsteve. The doc's talking rap stats and who facts like it's Christmas. The dropping points and making specs that you won't be. Man, get ready to ball. Cause he's talking hoop, he's got the scoop. Cutting right through the hoop, give you the loop. With a hoop, it's brains big spout the size of Ben Wallace's. On Raptors Republic and a tune, so click and read. Ooh, drop your pants and cough. Cause the doc is in, so let's begin. Affiliate to East.It.
It's Rapcast with Phdsteve on Raptors Republic.
Ooh, doctor.
Yes, it's me, it's Phdsteve back from the podcasting dead with a return to the Worldwide Roundtable. It's been a while since I've been on Raptors Republic, but happy to be back and talking about this great and historic moment in Raptors franchise history. Of course, those of you who've been with Raptors Republic for a while, you know, going back as far as a decade, will remember the early days of podcasting on the ESPN.com Troop affiliate Raptors Republic. And even before that, before we were with ESPN, back when we were just a group of local bloggers, Arsenalists, Raps fan, myself. But now the site is huge and the team is in the NBA Finals, and it's a wonderful time to be alive. And so thought we'd come back out here and share some fun stories and talk a little bit about the team and club that we all love. And to do that, of course, I'm going to bring in the usual suspects from back in the day. So again, if you know, the last time I think we did a worldwide roundtable was June in 2016. We did a draft special, and I think it's still up on SoundCloud if you want to go back and hear how right some of us were, and by some of us I mean Greg Mason, the prophet, and how wrong the rest of us were. Actually, if you go back and listen to some of the old Doctors Ids, you'll realize how wrong I was a fair bit of time. So hopefully today's will be a much more positive and long-lasting story than that. But let's bring in some of the usual suspects with me right now on the line. What makes us the Worldwide Roundtable is just that we are around the globe. So from the Louisiana-Texas border is my brother Mike, and he knows college basketball.
He ain't heavy. My brother.
I'm here. I'm happy to see the Raptors in the final, just like I'm sure everybody else is. You know, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, and before we bounce around, what's the vibe like right now? You know, down in the South and in the United States, what type of coverage are the Raptors getting right now at the NBA Finals?
The Raptors are getting all sorts of coverage, especially, you know, the morning talk shows on ESPN or Fox Sports. You know, Undisputed, or, you know, the shows with, you know, Get Up, the shows that they put on with all the talking heads. They're all talking about this series. Is Durant coming back? How good is Kawhi Leonard? Who's going where when it comes to free agency? And surprisingly enough, there's been a few talking heads, Jalen Rose among them, who have said that, you know, the Raptors are going to win the series. So.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we'll come back to probably all of those talking points as the podcast rolls on. But let's bounce to actual Toronto. In the six right now, in the solar vortex, is my good friend from the Fifth Quarter blog, Blair Miller. Blair, how's it going?
Yeah, boy! Oh, yeah. What time is it? I'm doing really good.
Hey, I'm very well, thank you. I'm the only one actually in Toronto, isn't that? That's right.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild here. Good Morning America is doing a show here, out of America in Toronto this week, apparently.
Wow, yeah, I was gonna say, because I mean, for those of you who don't know, I live in Toronto, but Mike and I both grew up in Toronto. Mike's in Louisiana, and I'm in Australia. So we actually have a worldwide, full global roundtable going on. And Blair, you are the only one there. What was it like? I mean, let's start right there. What was it like when the Raptors won? I saw some of it on social media. Some people sent some video clips of whatever the Young Dundas Square or King Street or Young Street, and you know. But what was the vibe like and the feeling when the Raptors clinched?
Oh, it was crazy. I watched at home, and I was like Game 7 against Philly. I ended up catching the game starting late, but I was recording it. So when you're fast forwarding through the commercials, and I had about 15 minutes left to catch up in the clincher against Milwaukee. And I wasn't upset about it, but let's just say I already knew that the Raptors had won, about 16 minutes behind, because you could hear the cars, even in the quiet neighborhood I live in, uptown, the car, you could already hear the honking. There were kids out yelling Raptors in the streets. And then you saw what happened downtown. I used to run a restaurant on Front Street when Canada won the Hockey World Cup, and they turned over a taxi cab and everything. It looked a lot like that, but a lot less violent. It was crazy and amazing what was going on.
Yeah, way to go, Canada. We're all really proud of you. Just want you to know.
No arrests. All
us expats around the globe. You did us well, Toronto. You did us well. You made us look good all around the globe. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this then. Maybe just we'll start here. First, let's talk maybe about, what because we've been fans for a long time. All of us since day one, we've been watching the Raptors itself, and all of us were NBA fans before the Raptors came into existence. Maybe not everybody who listens to this podcast will be like that. A lot of you are younger or newer to the game itself. That doesn't make you less of a fan. You're probably more of a fan than some of us. But I mean, we've been watching for a long time, and we've been through all these moments. This morning on ESPN Radio, I was listening to Damon Stoudemire. He was on giving an interview on Spain and Fitz, and actually he said he'll be at Game 1. So I remember the Damon draft pick. Where we booed him. we were booing the pick because we wanted the UCLA great Ed O'Bannon. That's right. UCLA finest. For those of you who don't know or haven't listened to the podcast, I'm a UCLA alum, so that's part of the one of the ongoing jokes we had the Doctors in podcast. But so we've been here from that moment. We watched it all, the highs, the lows. Let's go here. We'll go to you first, Blair, and then to Mike. Why don't you share maybe what this being in the finals means to longstanding Raptors fans like yourself, Blair?
Oh, well, it's crazy. As you mentioned, where us following basketball goes far, far back. It used to be back in the day where all you'd get was the last 20 seconds or so of a half-hour sports broadcast after watching hockey and baseball highlights twice over. They would go, and here are the NBA scores for tonight. And they would flash up 4 scores at a time on the screen for about 5 seconds each. And my friends and I would sit there trying to write them all down. And how far we've come now. And I remember there was an inaugural basketball tournament called the Raptor Fest. And 2 of my best friends, close friends to this day, they ended up getting chosen. It was a high school all-star game back in 1995. And they played against Jamal McGlure, was on that team. And just to think it's 25 years. This next season is the 25th season for the Raptors. And to think it's been 25 years and now they're in the finals. And we went from scores flashing up for 10 seconds at the end of a half hour to now the home court advantage in the NBA finals. And finally watching a team that, for the last year and a half, my favorite thing has just been I've watched, and it just dawned on me. I think it was about a week after the Gasol trade. I was like, oh my God, no bums are getting significant playing time. Yeah.
What was his name? Moiso. Remember when Moiso played here? And Sam Mitchell, who was the coach, said that some guys at the end of the bench are just taking up air. He said in a post-game interview about his own player.
Yeah, but a lot of them were seeing floor time too, and now it's just amazing to think to have gone. I don't know. I don't really have much perspective of whether 25 years is a long time to wait or not necessarily. I don't think so. But just to witness it firsthand the whole time, and being in Toronto, living an hour away first, but being there and going to games in the Rogers Centre at first, when you'd sit there and it would be in a baseball diamond. And you'd be playing basketball there. It was crazy.
Yeah, and then at Maple Leaf Gardens as well too. Don't forget they played there as well. And you make an interesting point, right? Mike, I'll come to you in just 1 second. 25 years is actually a long time if you think about it, because the NBA is one of the leagues that is traditionally set up so that bad teams have the opportunity to get better, because there's no other sport where one individual player can sway the fortunes of that franchise more quickly than in the NBA, right? It's only 5 on the court. You get a guy who dominates. He can change the fortunes of your team overnight. And so to be 25 years in, coming from an expansion point, you would think that at some point you would get enough high draft picks to convert those picks into something that would allow you to contend. We've seen some contending teams, but it's taken a long time. And there's been some good decisions and bad decisions, and we've talked about most of them on podcasts and articles throughout the years. But to get to where we are now, I think 25 years is a long time. But I also think it's pretty amazing to sort of be in this moment right now.
Please refer to the Glenn Grunwald factor for part of the delay.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are lots of people who will say there's a Babcock factor. Rest in peace.
Yeah, Babcock. I just rest in peace, Babcock. I didn't want to, but yeah, definitely Babcock.
And there'll be some who will say there's an Isaiah factor, and certainly there's a Colangelo factor, and for a long period of time there was a Masai factor. I mean,
Isaiah did draft Stoudemire and Marcus Camby though.
Yeah, yes, he certainly did. Okay, well, maybe we'll have some fun and go back over some of those drafts and the rights and the wrongs along the way. But let's go to you, Mike. What does being in the finals mean to you, and a longstanding Raptor fan like yourself?
Well, I think for most, I'll speak for most, even though I might not be for most. But this is sort of vindication that we are a basketball city. We're not just the Maple Leafs anymore. We are a basketball city, and we are a basketball nation. And when you look at what happened to Vancouver and the Grizzlies, right, how easily that could have happened in Toronto too, considering a lot of the bad decisions that we made and the bad hires and the bad draft picks, right? And 25 years, I agree with you, might not seem long in Leafland, but it's still a long time in the NBA where players rotate in and out of the league very quickly, and dominant players can dominate and carry teams on their backs. And, this is the first time, it's unfortunate it took 25 years, but this is the first time that we've had the best player in basketball. And this is what happens when you have a player at this level, right? Vince Carter, great player, not at this level, right? There's something that happens when you have a player at Kawhi's level. And when you have that, it makes all the difference in the basketball universe. Toronto's been waiting a long time and has suffered through a lot of really bad teams. And I think it just goes to show, that we deserve this.
Okay. I mean, everyone who's listened to any part of me on social media or in the past on Raptors Republic knows that I do not like Vince Carter. Okay, so I am not a Vince backer or supporter in any way. In fact, I've often said that I would give up my season's tickets if they retired Vince's jersey, and that's still to this day true. But I will tell you, Mike, there was a period of time. It was a brief period of time, but there was a period of time of probably about 18 months where Vince Carter was the best player in the NBA. And if you didn't think so, there was at least an ongoing debate of whether, it was a real debate. Would you trade Vince for Kobe straight up? And a lot of people, real basketball people, were saying, I wouldn't make that deal from the Vince Carter side. Okay. So, there was a moment, it all went sour. We all know what happened. He missed the shot. He graduated. He quit on his team and whatever, all that other stuff that went on, whatever, all that aside, there was a very brief window where we did have the best player in the world. Having said all that,
I'd actually say that was a brief window of some sort of temporary insanity on analysts' parts. But
well, Blair, go back to it though. Let's think.
Yeah,
think
but
about
a guy that's never been invested on defense isn't worth trading for Kobe Bryant. I don't know. Anyway.
I found that Vince Carter is a great player, and he will go down as a great player, and the hype around him, the dunking, the things that he can do. I don't want to take anything of that away from Vince Carter, but I think that, had he made that shot, had he won that series and had he continued to invest in his team, I would feel differently. And maybe I'm jaded, but I don't think he was, I don't think he was the greatest player in the league, by far. In any time, but again, that's
here's what I'll give you. Here's what I'll give you here in this. And again, this is I think you're making a really good point about it's not about Vince, it's about Kawhi, right? And just about how good Kawhi actually is. And I think I said it a couple weeks ago on Twitter, and no one I put don't come at me, and no one actually came at me. But the point that I made was Kawhi Leonard is the best two-way player in basketball that I've seen since Jordan, and I actually mean it. I don't think I've ever seen a player since Jordan play that way, that hard on defense and on offense, and make that big a difference on both ends of the court for the entire duration of a game in and game out since Jordan. And I think if you want to put it at that level, then yeah, Kawhi is the best player we've ever had. And I do think that right now he's the best player in the NBA. No one's playing better basketball than him throughout the playoffs, regardless of whether Durant is healthy or not. But I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I can look myself in the mirror and honestly say that if I had the chance to take Kawhi or Steph tomorrow to start my franchise, that I would take Kawhi over Steph. I don't know that I could actually honestly say that. Blair?
Oh, I feel like that's a question where there's no good or bad answer. but go on.
If I could add one thing to this, right? Like, again, not to take away from sort of what Vince Carter did or how great of a player he was. One thing that we do have to acknowledge is that Vince Carter did set the bedrock down for the team and brought a lot of people in Canada towards basketball, right? Like, he brought a lot of the hype up north and it got people invested in a game that wasn't something that we were sort of before that. So Vince Carter was incredibly important to this franchise. I don't want that to sort of seem lost in this conversation. But Kawhi Leonard as a two-way player, there, you're right. Jordan was the last time that we've seen someone so dominating at that position.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there might be some possible arguments made for traditional centers before the way the game's played now. But I think it's important to note before Leonard got hurt, when Jaja Pachulia Bruce Bowened him, people were talking about him in this way then. There was a lot of talk, even though LeBron was killing it, that Kawhi, there was a lot of, is Kawhi the best two-way player in the league right now? And he's even better than that now. So I don't see how it's possible to say anybody else occupies that role other than Leonard.
Okay, we'll come back to Leonard a little bit later on. I want to do some other stuff first, and we'll talk more about Kawhi. Obviously, we want to talk about his impact on the team and what his future looks like, because those are always talking points, and everyone wants a chance to weigh in on that. So we'll just put a pin in that and come back to it in a second. Let's stay where we're just talking about our experiences along the way and some of our growth as fans and what we've been through to get here. You guys have a favorite memory of the Raptors from this particular season? I mean, like, win or lose, I think everyone's feeling pretty good about where the Raptors are, and when it's all said and done and the final whistle is blown, you'll look back on this season, you'll remember it, I'm sure, fondly. What will stick out to you as maybe your favorite memory from the season, Mike?
I'd have to say it was Kawhi finally showing emotion when he hit that unbelievably lucky shot to put away the 76ers, where he screamed and he smiled and he hugged everybody, which was so un-Kawhi. That you always wonder how much emotion he has. And for the Canadian fans out there who don't get American television or don't get the TNT broadcast and get to see Kenny, Charles, and Shaq, Kenny has been throughout this entire postseason. He's continued to say the same thing about Kawhi Leonard, right? Kawhi Leonard is the Terminator. He doesn't feel emotion. He cannot be reasoned with. He cannot be bargained with. He is going to keep coming at you. And he has said this over and over during the season, and it feels true, right? It's so nice to finally see some emotion out of Kawhi Leonard. But if you think about him in terms of like the Terminator, he is going to shut you down. He's going to find you. He's not going to stop until he gets his way.
I love that social media took that shot and put it to Titanic. That's one of my favorite things when you watch it with the Titanic music, or when you watch it with the Avengers music. It's so good. Blair, what about on to you? What would say maybe your favorite memory from the season?
Well, I have to go with Mike, and I think most people would. It's the shot. I'm sure it'll come up again while we're talking, but yeah, I mean, it is after all, and I'm still surprised that it is the first ever buzzer beater to win a Game 7.
Yeah, that actually surprised me very much too. I never, I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, that it was the shot, and it's an eternal one. For me, it's interesting because my favorite memory of the season is actually the balanced units for Gasol trade. It's believe it or you guys know I love Jonas and have for years, always calling for hashtag more cowbell for those of you who are longtime listeners. But I think we saw something different in Masai Ujiri this year. We saw it at the end of last season when he made the DeMar deal. So the DeMar deal was the first time really that we saw Masai Ujiri in his career as a general manager trade dollars for dollars. I mean, if you've listened before to my arguments against Masai Ujiri along the way, you'll know what I used to always say is Masai would trade quarters and turn them into nickels. He would take assets, single assets, and divest them into smaller, less valuable assets, and just collect as many pieces as possible, and then try to reassemble them in different ways. And it didn't get to the finish line. And I was always saying what I want to see him do is sort of double down and really take his shot. And this year he did that. I mean, the DeMar trade was a massive trade. It could have gone wrong for 100 different reasons, but it went right. I mean, we are in the finals. And even if Kawhi leaves at the end of the playoffs, even if he goes somewhere else in free agency, I mean, Masai did it. I mean, he took his chance. Now, granted, he won that trade. He didn't trade nickels for quarters. He didn't go in the other direction. I mean, he traded his best player and the best player to ever play for our franchise. Really, if there's ever a jersey we should retire, it's DeMar DeRozan's, and nobody else's. So I would stop the rest of the nonsense. I mean, and he took him and he traded him and got the best player back in Kawhi. But still, it was a huge risk. And then he saw halfway through the season that the team still needed more. That even with Kawhi, there was a need to address some of the other inconsistencies in the lineup. And he was willing to go back to his pile of assets and take, which was clearly an important piece. Jonas Valanciunas was a big chip desired by many executives around the league. And again, willing to double down again in the Marcus Gasol deal. So for me, I mean, what I take away from this season was this is the season where Masai Ujiri really, I mean, he's completely earned my respect as a general manager and really went all in. And I think we're seeing the fruits of it. Any thoughts, Mike, on Masai's moves this year?
I loved both of those moves. When I learned that we got Kawhi Leonard, I thought that was great, because if we had learned anything from the past few seasons, is that DeMar DeRozan, great in the regular season, when defenses get tougher in the postseason, he cannot be that guy to lead a team through the playoffs. It's just it wasn't going to get done.
Hold on, I want to just jump in there. I was sorry to cut you off, but I want to just jump in there. I think I would like to have seen DeMar DeRozan have the opportunity to be the core piece in an offense that was schemed not by Dwayne Casey before I completely agree with that argument. There's lots of evidence to back up what you've said, but I mean, he was also hampered by Dwayne Casey as the great offensive mind, scheming for him with significant ISO ball, over the last several seasons. Back to you.
That's a very valid point. What I think, and I told this to our father earlier on in the postseason, was that had the Raptors lost, to Philadelphia, the resounding idea was, what, Masai didn't go far enough, right? He should have traded not only for Gasol but also for Mike Conley. Like, he should have gone in and picked up, I believe, a better point guard, a bigger point guard, one who can play, I think, more or better defense than a Lowry could. But you know what? Lowry has shown up sort of since
Lowry
then.
Lowry has showed.
He has shown up huge, and that completely shut my mouth. And I said, you know what? Lowry deserves the respect. He has led this team in a different way than Kawhi has. He has put his heart and soul on the floor, and I'm all for it. But up until that point in the Philly series, when Philly's a bigger team, they are a longer team, and it's really hard for a guy of his size to make an impact. And I thought that might have been, had they lost, I would have sort of questioned Masai's not spending more of those chips to get Conley out of there. But I'm all in on the moves that he made. They were very impressive. He went all in, and look at, this is the result.
Yeah, and let's talk about that Philly series and actually the Orlando series too. Let's talk a little bit about the journey as we go from here. I mean, in that Philly series, I think the reason why it went as far as it did is just like with the Milwaukee series. Guys just weren't really making shots. I mean, there were really long stretches where things seemed to come undone. And you talk about a moment where the whole franchise is just like has their heart in their stomach or their mouth or whatever the saying is, and they're just like, oh my goodness, are we here again, Raptors fans? Is this where we are? We're not. Let's go back to Game 1 against Orlando, right? Let's go back. the very beginning of these playoffs. Blair, after Game 1 Orlando, were you thinking Masai Ujiri made the right move, or were you thinking here we go again?
I wasn't putting it in that context. Whenever I thought about it along those lines, it wasn't whether he made the right move or not. Which, well, I guess it is kind of in a different way thinking the same thing is, well, there goes Kawhi, right?
Yeah.
So I guess in retrospect, it would have been a good move. But I did think Game 1 was more of a scare than I thought it would have been beforehand. To just say, oh, they'll lose Game 1. But the way that they did, again, with another vintage Lowry Game 1 pooper, and also just the way they had nothing. They had no answer for DJ Augustin pick and roll. And he torched them. And, though, sometimes Nick Nurse is a little slow to make rotation or matchup adjustments, but give him credit in that series. They came back, and Augustin was not really much of a factor again for the rest of the series. And I think Toronto's had a tough journey the whole way because Orlando was a hot team coming into the playoffs, maybe the best defensive team in the league since the All-Star break. And this kind of started a run for Toronto, I thought, that kind of almost reminds me of the old school Eastern Conference gauntlets. I mean, obviously the play is not as physical anymore, but they had to go through, like back in those days, some of those, so they've had to go through some real physical and demanding teams to play against. And it started with Orlando.
Yeah, you talk about Nurse's adjustments. We'll come to that a little later because I want to talk a lot about Nick Nurse. Again, another move where Masai Ujiri, he really went all in on Nick Nurse. I mean, he put himself and his security, I think, with the franchise not in jeopardy, but he put it on the line when he said, this is the guy I'm hiring. I don't care what anybody thinks, and I'm going with him. Because had the season not turned out the way it did, I mean, there'd be a lot of people who'd say, well, you had a team that could have contended for the conference finals. You had a team that had a superstar in Kawhi Leonard. And you had one season, and you put a rookie coach in there. But I mean, we'll come back to that again because I think it's a big move for Masai, and I think Nurse has done a really good job that needs to be pointed out. But what you said about the struggles in Orlando, I think is really important too, because I think that laid the foundation for where the team is right now. I think what makes them so dangerous going into the finals is they're a team that's already been punched in the mouth. Right? I mean, like they got punched in the mouth in Orlando, and then when Philly punched them in the mouth, they were not that they were ready for it, but they had been there before, and they were, they won in Game 7. But I mean, they responded when Butler comes down the court and makes that layup, and it looks like we're going to overtime. I mean, there's a resilience in this team. Yes, Mike Kawhi's the Terminator, absolutely, but there's a feeling like we've been there. So when they went down 0-2 to Milwaukee, after a first game which they completely should have won, and a second game where they get smoked, everybody is feeling like, uh-oh, except I feel, they had been there before. And when they punched back to Milwaukee hadn't been punched. Yes, they lost Game 1 to Boston on their own home court, but then they won 4 straight. And Milwaukee all season hadn't lost 3 games in a row, and then Toronto took them, 4 straight. And Milwaukee didn't have the answer.
If I may, right? Milwaukee kind of had a bad game against Boston. They didn't get beat, right? Toronto beat them, right? You know what I mean? Like you're trying to say, like that loss against Boston, they just were able to say, oh, it was an off night for us. But they'd have on nights against Toronto and lose.
Yes, I mean, and that's the point. Is that I think that the adversary that they had to face early on, Game 1, immediately from Game 1 of the playoffs, sort of set the tone for this playoff series. And that was Toronto was going to fight, and they were going to have to fight the whole way there. And I think that really helped them when they got to Milwaukee, because Milwaukee had sort of been floating their way along. It was very much big bad Sonny Liston, and then along comes Cassius Clay, right? And that everyone's afraid of Sonny Liston, and Sonny Liston thinks that everybody's afraid of him, but then all of a sudden he gets punched in the mouth, and then everything changes from there. Mike, what do you think about that? And the boxing reference, Mike, which by the way was directly for you, because those of you who don't know, Mike is a professor and a boxing historian, so he covers that particular sport. Go ahead, Mike.
I appreciate the boxing reference. Always love boxing when we have a chance to talk about it. That Game 1 in Orlando, I turned off the TV. And I was so mad because that was a game where I felt we were out-coached and out-hustled, right? And when you walk into the playoffs and you are the lower seed, you are not expected to win. You need to come out and punch the other team in the mouth and show them that you're for real. And the Raptors that was a game they should have won. That was, and just like the game one against Milwaukee was another game that they should have won, and it just felt like they were unprepared. And the end of that Orlando game actually made me question whether, of all the moves that were made, was the Nick Nurse hiring going to be the Achilles heel? Like, did he not make enough adjustments and rotations in that game to actually win that game? And is this going to be the theme of the playoffs, that Nick Nurse is going to be one or two steps behind whoever the other coach is? And that's what I felt at the end of that game.
Okay, let's go there now. Then let's talk about Nick Nurse, and we'll come back and talk about the journey again and preview the Golden State series, the finals, and talk a little more about Masai Ujiri as well. But let's go to Nick Nurse. I mean, big gamble for Masai Ujiri. It's paid off because they are in the finals. So you can and along the way, I think Nick Nurse has done a pretty darn good job. He's had to deal with all types of issues, like, for example, load management. And he still managed to win 58 games, was only a handful of games behind Milwaukee, and has home court against the Western Conference for his team in the finals itself. In each of the series, Blair, you touched on this. Adjustments were made in the Orlando series immediately. Adjustments were made in the Philly series, and I thought the way in which I thought their defensive scheme to team defend and clog the middle against Giannis and Milwaukee was the best defense I've seen any team play against Giannis all season long. And I think that was the real difference in winning and losing that series, is that they were continually able to make life difficult for Giannis in a way that no one else was able to. And every time Milwaukee tried to make an adjustment to that, Toronto adjusted to that adjustment. Their defense won them games throughout the series, and I think that schematically, Nurse did a really nice job. Even things like knowing when to go to Van Vliet, knowing when to go small against Milwaukee really helped as well. Let's go to you first, Blair. Maybe a little bit of your thoughts about his Nick Nurse's year, maybe about his in-game adjustments, his rotations. What are your thoughts?
I do think he's done a good job. I personally think he was a little too slow to adjust in the Philly series once Brent Brown went with a shorter rotation than he'd been using most of the year. But obviously it turned out okay. It's not an easy situation for him to walk into, right? I mean, it isn't a promotion from within, but, it's awkward. He's replacing a coach of the year, right? And, but he's actually one of the things I always gauge coaches by, or try to anyway, and I think I've said this with Casey before, is Nurse has his players playing hard for him. And that's not as easy as a lot of people think it is, coaching-wise. And also, one thing, too, is obviously, I don't even think you can call it a pink elephant because everybody's talking about it anyway, is the Kawhi situation. To go through these playoffs and have, like, game one, like I said, game one against Orlando, Kawhi's going to leave. Even, like, the game 7 shot might be the thing we look back on that makes him stay. We'll talk about later, I'm sure, if that happens. But imagine all the pressure they're all playing under and coaching under, and Nurse has to manage all that. Well, they all know that they're also playing to keep the team together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All year.
Which is a whole different kind of pressure that we can't really understand. And he's navigated it quite well.
You talk about the adjustments with Philly when Brown went to a shorter rotation. I think that Nurse, that's a tough spot for him to be in, because I think he tried to open up his bench. I mean, we saw him try to include other players, but there was no one to trust. I mean, like, and I actually thought he did a really good job of adjusting to that. Like, he said, okay, I need to open the bench. I need to look somewhere else. I need to find some scoring somewhere else. I need to share some of these minutes, because really the Toronto starters have played – the 5 Toronto starters have played more minutes than any other 5 across the playoffs, right? So he tried to look somewhere else and find help, but there was nowhere to be found. I mean, we found out very early that Meeks or whatever, I mean, he's not seeing floor time, right? You just can't go there. And then even I think he's to continue on how well I think he's navigated the difficulties. And I was very anti-Nurse in the beginning as a hire, or not anti. I thought I was skeptical of that being the right hire. I mean, he's got to this point with this Raptors team being having shot more 3-pointers than any team really in the history of the NBA playoffs. They're on pace right now to pass the Golden State, I think it's 2016 team that had more threes than any other team in playoff history. And
Really?
Yeah, and they're doing that. He's doing that. So I mean, like, so we have an offensive scheme of that's different than what we've seen before, but at the same time doing that when Danny Green is shooting,
Yes.
I think like 25% across the playoffs,
and he's making uncharacteristically bad defensive decisions too, Danny Green. I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know. I hope he doesn't have something personal serious going on or something, because he's just something's going on.
He's navigating that though. I mean, if you said to Nick Nurse at the beginning of the playoffs, what's your rotation going to look like? He's going to say, okay, when I need minutes here, I know that I can get this from Serge Ibaka. And Ibaka's had 2 really good games in the playoffs, but sometimes you put Ibaka in and he is there, and sometimes you put Ibaka in and there's nothing. And he's navigated, having to manage Gasol when Gasol wasn't making any shots at all, like a complete force for games. Navigating Danny Green being hot and cold. You'd say, well, I go to Green off the bench when I need 3-point scoring, but he's got none of that from Green. I mean, he's been able still to find a way to make the combinations work. And we question his rotations and his lineups a fair bit, but he's found a way to twist the Rubik's Cube to get the puzzle to work so that we're here. And as great as Kawhi has been, and Kawhi's been the best player in the playoffs, and he is moving this team, and he is the superstar, etc. I mean, Kawhi by himself hasn't got the team here. It has been a series of parts around Kawhi, and to Nurse's credit, he's been the puppet master that's made that happen.
Yeah, and you know what? I've made a decision, and again, I say this, as you guys know, I'm not really much of a homer at all, so I'm not some Nurse apologist or anything, but I think a lot of these guys' struggles can possibly be explained by, and we'll have the word for the day, fungible. Right? Schemes in the playoffs now in the NBA, they're very fungible. Like, look at how much you have to change across Orlando, Philly, Milwaukee, Golden State. Right? How much you have to change your defensive schemes, especially. How much you have to change what you're doing on offense. And Gasol is a perfect example of this. Green too, but I think Gasol more because he's still being more productive. Gasol's being extremely productive. He's just underperforming statistically big time. But he's also being asked to do all sorts of stuff he's not used to doing, and playing in spaces and moving in spaces defensively that he probably didn't do as much in Memphis, especially with regards to the pick and roll and stuff, right? And so then you go and ask him, when he used to have starters minutes, now he's got to come in and still be efficient on offense. That's hard. And Gasol's disappeared at times too. Ibaka has, Green especially. But I see a lot of them playing in a lot of space, and I can't yet decide whether they're being indecisive or whether it's like, especially with Milwaukee, because you saw them seal off Giannis by doing this, is not committing much because they're playing in space a lot. And that really puts players out of sorts on both ends of the floor, even if for your offense, if you're playing that way defensively. And I find impressive because Nurse has kind of almost negotiated that chaos and that fungible different types of approach each round. And the players aren't getting what you'd expect out of them, and sometimes they seem lost, but it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you make, and I think we're going to see it again because we're about to see a completely different team and offense than anything we've seen so far in the playoffs. Really, I mean, you have to pick up the ball handler as soon as they cross half because they're already in shooting territory, and that combination of Clay and Steph is deadly. But even more than that, you talk about Gasol, you talk about Ibaka, and the work that they're going to have to do. Draymond Green is going to be. We're going to get to the series in a second, but I mean.
But what you have to do, though, just if I may, what you have to do, though, and this comes back to coaching again, I say, because I can't decide yet whether it's a product of this try and play half of everything sort of defensive approach they seem to be taking, or whether it's players' shortcomings. But Siakam especially, but Gasol, all these guys, but especially Siakam, a guy who makes his living right now in and around the corners and the baseline, they all have to start being better at sealing off on the weak side on the glass.
Yeah.
They have not done that all playoffs. All playoffs, the weak side glass rotations, they've been getting killed on the rebounds that way. And you'll lose the Golden State by 20 playing like that.
Yeah, offensive rebounding is
Defensive too, though.
Defense,
not
yeah. No, I was gonna say, for Golden State, they are actually the top. I think they're the top offensive rebounding team right now in the playoffs. And the problem with them is that when you give them second chance opportunities, those turn into 3-point plays very, very quickly because that ball gets swung right back out to the 3-point line and it's in the net before you can blink. So and we have not been a very good rebounding team. The Raptors have not been a very good rebounding team throughout the playoffs. And part of that is the construction of the lineups too, and the type that of defense that they play. No doubt, Blair, and you're certainly right too that they will need to be better at it in the upcoming series. Okay, one last question about Nick Nurse, and then we'll bounce off of that. Mike, is there an argument to be made that Nick Nurse is the best coach in the East right now, or do you think that him being in the finals is more a product of his environment and the players that he has?
Well, if Coach of the Year is determined through regular season and playoffs, then yes, I would say that he is, because to get in on sort of the adjustments that Nurse has been making, while his in-game adjustments I feel are coming a little bit slow, and that's sort of one of the reasons why Philly took so long. Apart from the fact that Van Vliet was 3 for 24, 1 of 14 from 3. Lowry was 25%, Ibaka was 21%, and so forth. Anyways, but that it's his game-to-game adjustments that I found on who we're going to attack, who we're going to put the ball into whose hands, who we're going to try to take it out of, how we're going to play defense this next game. I think that's where Nick Nurse has really shone in these playoffs, despite the fact that this team is jacking up threes that they are not making at an unbelievable pace. And, statistically speaking, if you throw up, and I think it's like 660 threes through 3 rounds of the playoffs, and you're only making, I think it's like 34% is what I read today, is what the Raptors have been making 3-point wise. So when you jack up that many threes at only 34% making, you should be losing, but they're not. And so we do have to at least give Nick Nurse credit in terms of, getting his players to continue to push and find ways to win when they are just jacking up threes like nobody's business.
Yeah, just so the actual numbers there, just so we're clear. So 34.5% is their 3-point percentage in the playoffs. That's 5th right now. But the percentage of shots that they've taken from from that range is over 40% of the shots they've taken in the playoffs. And the projection is that if the finals go 5 games, this is from NBA.com. If the finals go 5 games, the Raptors will break the Warriors' postseason record of 306 3-pointers made. Also, Mike, on the point that you made,
they want to win the possession game, and they'll have to.
Yeah. Mike, the other point you made, I think, which is a good one, is that the game-to-game adjustments, and we've seen the Raptors, for the most part, there's been 1 or 2 games where it hasn't looked that, but for the most part, the Raptors have won the first quarter a fair bit in across these playoffs. Now, then you see things sort of move into sticky places, second and third quarters along the way, but they've been consistently good in the first quarter and finding their way through that. Even when they give up a decent amount of points. But, I mean, nobody has better first quarters in the playoffs than the Golden State Warriors. They're the top performing team in the first quarter across the NBA playoffs. So Toronto will definitely have to be ready. Blair, your thoughts on Nurse? Where do you think he ranks in the coaching hierarchy of the East right now?
I don't know where he ranks exactly. I don't think he's the best coach in the East, but I also don't think he has to be a product of his environment either. I mean, there's a lot of competition. There's some good coaches in the East, right? You got Brad Stevens. Mike Budenholzer is probably going to win Coach of the Year. Eric Spoelstra lives under the radar all the time. Brad Stevens, or I already said Brad, Nate McMillan even. And I guess, he inherited a great situation, but, so did Spoelstra initially in Miami, but also Nurse isn't some coattailing personality either, right? Like, he's coached more winning teams overseas than I think he has different suit jackets. Like he's had experience being a head coach. And as I said before, just the way how everything needs to change, and it's been a crazy, weird, chaotic, series of adjustments throughout each series and from series to series. I think he's done a great job, but you don't have to be the best coach in the East, and you don't have to coattail on your own situation to become a finals winning coach either. So,
yeah, Ty Lue's a perfect example of that too. Okay, let's bounce now to the finals and talk a little bit about the two teams we've got. We've got the Golden State Warriors, got the Toronto Raptors. I mean, you'll hear all types of previews. You don't need us to preview the series for you, but we're going to talk a little bit about it and some of the things that we think about these two teams. Golden State, of course, is in their 5th straight finals, and arguably they would have won 4 straight had it not been both for an insane series from LeBron, coupled with a ridiculous suspension for Draymond Green. And I think if you take away that sort of individual moment and the block of the greatest defensive play in the history of the NBA Finals, we're talking about Golden State going for their 5th straight title. They're clearly the best team we've seen in basketball in a long time. I want to start with this question for you guys. Where does this team, I mean, again, we're long watching basketball fans. I remember watching Showtime Lakers. I remember watching Bad Boy Pistons. I mean, obviously Jordan, etc. Where does this team rank for you in terms of greatest NBA dynasties? Blair, to you.
Well, I think for one thing, these finals pending, but they have to be up or near the top. I have a hard time doing conclusive tops with, teams I've never seen play in person, teams playing from different eras, but they are
you saw 2000 Lakers, you saw 90s Bulls, you saw Showtime Lakers, you saw Larry Bird Celtics, you saw Bad Boy Pistons,
they're hard to compare, but we are now, what I was going to say is, one thing they have, though, is they are now starting to get in the territory. You've started to see it this last week for the first time, really, is they're starting to get into stuff where all you can talk about is the late 50s, early 60s Celtics.
Yeah.
And those stats are always revered, but at the same time taken with huge grains of salt because the league was so small, quality of competition was this, blah, 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 blah. And now they're starting to mute out those numbers.
Yeah. There was only 9 teams in the league when the Celtics went to 5 straight titles or championships in 1960.
Yeah, and most of the rounds were 3 games. I think the series and the playoffs and stuff. So, it's a totally different situation, but also one that I do think. I mean, I've been following basketball since the year before the Pistons won their first championship, and never have before over the last 2 seasons or so has there been more just conceding that this team will win. Even when the Bulls or the Lakers, wherever, when they were three-peating, they were like, oh, I don't know if they're going to do it this year. They're having a hard time. With Golden State, it's, oh, we're kind of having a hard time, but that's what happens when these other teams three-peated, so they'll be good. And you've never seen that before. So I think perception can make reality a lot of times, and I don't think we've ever perceived a team as unbeatable or as favored as this.
Yeah, I mean they're 12-2 12-4 across the 3 playoff
series.
They
don't even have their best player, and they're still heavily favored.
Yeah, and what's amazing if you think about it is there was a moment in that Houston series where you really believed that they were going to lose, and then they went to Houston and beat Houston. I mean, and they beat them in their own building, and then that was really it. I mean, like that was even Portland. I mean, Portland played incredibly well. I mean, people forget that even though they got swept in multiple games, they had double-digit leads over Golden State in the 4th quarter, and yet things just evaporated so quickly. The danger of this Golden State team is there is no lead that you have against them that is safe, and there is no moment in the game when you are leading, or even or when you are even with them, where you can feel like, okay, we can take a possession off, because they can put 10 points on the board.
You can't take any possessions off.
Yeah,
you can't take any possessions off.
Although I will say, I mean, they're outscoring their. There's a point from a stat from NBA.com, which I really thought was interesting. Is 6.2 points per 100 possessions is what they're outscoring their playoff opponents this year, and that is their worst mark through the first 3 rounds over the last 5 years of playoffs. So they've been. This is their 5th finals they're going to, and this is their I guess like their lowest margin of victory, and that's. I think that's saying something, because it's taken a lot of Steph magic to really sort of get them to this point. Now they're playing for history, so I would never want to sort of bet against a team playing for history that has this much talent. But I do actually think that this team is beatable, and I do actually think the Raptors match up well against them. Before we talk about that, and I'll give you guys a chance to have your say on that, Mike. Where does this team lie for you in sort of greatness along history?
Well, in terms of shooting, I don't think it's really a question. Like, this is the most insane shooting team I think we've ever seen. I've never seen a team shoot this well over so long of a period of time, making the ridiculous shots that they do. So if you want to go in terms of shooting, that they're the best that I think that I've ever seen. But I think there has to be something to said about, stringing championships together. Yes, LeBron had ridiculous call. Yes, Draymond Green got a ridiculous suspension. I get all of that, but at the end of the day, they haven't three-peated yet, right? So once and if this team three-peats, then we can start putting them in the same conversation, as the Lakers that put three in a row, as the Bulls who did that twice, who might have won 8 in a row had Jordan not left in the middle of all of that that went on in his life, right? And I agree that the Celtics of the 60s, where they won the championship in 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 68, and 69, right? So there is a time to say something like that's a great dynasty, right? But then there's also a decade where, it's either the Lakers or the Celtics who win the championship, with I think the 76ers as the only lone example in the 70s of another team that actually won within there. And so
that's because Moses came along and parted the seas between those two.
Someone needs to allow the 76ers to win one. So Golden State, are they dominating? Yes. Are they a dynasty? Possibly, if they win 3 in a row. But then, I guess this team reminds me of that Lakers, that Shaq Kobe team where, you didn't know what was going to happen. You realize things might be falling off and people might be leaving. And you add a whole bunch of older players who you're not quite sure about, the Karl Malones and Gary Paytons at the end of their career. And you're not quite sure if they can ball anymore. And you make it to the finals, and you make it really easily to the finals, and then you lose to a really defensive-minded Detroit Pistons.
That's a good shout. I hadn't thought about it in that light. I mean, certainly, I like the way the Raptors match up against them. Continue on, Mike.
We got to remember that Lakers team that made it to that finals with Malone and with Payton. You still had a Shaq who was averaging almost 30 points a game, and you still had a Kobe that was averaging close to 30 points a game in the playoffs. But you knew that they didn't like each other, and you knew that there was a lot of dysfunction in that locker room. Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, and you don't know exactly where everyone's head's at, and if everybody really wants to ball with each other next year. There's so many question marks, and that team was also chasing history, right? And so, but how much is left, and is it a question that the Pistons were the better team, or were they just the hungrier team with less distractions?
Blair, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, that's a really interesting point. Taking this series and looking at it through the lens of the Pistons.
I don't think Rick Fox is any Kevin Durant.
No, but they also had Robert Horry. They also had
Robert Horry is no Draymond Green.
But they had Shaquille O'Neal, who was the most dominant player.
At
that time, right? You're talking about a guy at the beginning of that dynasty was averaging 40 and 20 in a couple of rounds.
Yeah, but what's unique about this team is it's at least proven over a 5-game sample, and a pretty impressive one at that it can, again, as I said, not even have its best player, arguably, which is also happens to be one of the best pure scorers ever.
But Blair,
what?
In fairness, the Portland team they beat also didn't have their best player. Let's be honest, right? They swept the Portland team, being down by double digits in multiple games in the fourth quarter. Yeah, and Portland was missing their best player. I mean, I do think that Portland series is a very different series if that's a full strength and a healthy.
But are we saying if you take Shaq off of the Lakers, they're just going to trounce Portland?
All I'm saying is you want to give credit to the Golden State team playing without Kevin Durant, but
Golden State's playing with their best player, who's one of the best pure scorers ever, and they're still sweeping people. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think the Lakers sweep anybody with Shaq off the roster.
They did happen to win 2 more titles after Shaq left, so I mean, there's an argument.
Yeah, but they also added Pau Gasol to do that, right?
Yes. The lesser known and less talented I'm going to give you an interesting stat. You tell me if you think this stat bodes well or not well for the Toronto Raptors. We already know that Golden State went, 12-4 across the playoffs so far, but 10 of their 16 games. This is the most out of any team has ended within 5 points. Was within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. 10 of the 16 games they played in were within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. And that's as many as they had in the last 2 postseasons combined. So my question to you is, the fact that these games are coming down to sort of tight spaces for Golden State, does that favor Golden State because, as we talk about them being champions, they've been there before, they're clinical, they're deadly shooters, or does that favor a team like Toronto, who we've seen have some dogfights over the last couple rounds? Mike?
I think that favors Toronto. I think if you think that Golden State, they hadn't had to have done it in the last few years in their playoff runs, this might be a case of other teams are trying to figure out and finding ways to defend against them. So you can sort of look at it that, Toronto is, I think, the second best defensive team in these playoffs. So you could arguably look at, they haven't faced against a defense like this. And in the course of these playoffs as well, Golden State has looked vulnerable in a way that we haven't seen before. Having, lost that game to the Clippers, where the Clippers came back from the largest deficit in postseason history to win a game, and to again being down in that Portland series at multiple times, looking like they might not be able to catch up again. I think this team doesn't look as invincible as it has in the past. Right, in the past we've been swept up with all the stuff that they've done, and how they find ways to win, and they make it look easy. But I think if you look really at it, it hasn't been that easy for them. And they're going up against a team that is also now battle-tested with a really good star player who plays really good defense, and the team has been playing really well. They're ready for them, I think, in a way that they haven't seen yet in these postseason.
Okay, Blair, I got a stat for you. I'm going to give it to you. You tell me if you think this favors the Raptors or favors Golden State. Golden State in the playoffs are 8-1 when they've led by double digits at any point in the game. But they're also 4-3 when they've trailed by double digits. The Raptors, on the other hand, 9-1 when they lead by double digits, but 2-5 when they trail by double digits. How do you think that plays itself out in the finals?
That almost sounds like a wash statistically in a way. I think this kind of overlaps with the last stat as well, but I think both teams are going to be ready to play and kill it in close games. The Raptors have already proven most of the games, not most, but it feels like most of their big games have been very close, hard-fought games. They're must-win games, that is. I think if anything, the more close, I would think the more the games are close, I would give the edge to the Raptors, actually, as long as Durant's out, because I do think Golden State has kind of leaned on him in late minutes of games for the last couple of years, and if they don't have that, the Raptors will be in more contention than otherwise.
Okay, keeping it here, we'll do one more for each of you, Mike. The Raptors themselves are 11-0 when they've scored 104 points or more per 100 possessions. Given the nature of how Golden State likes to play, is it in the Raptors' best interest to play at pace or to slow the game down?
It's in the Raptors' interest. I think if you can slow Golden State down, I think is the question that we've said. Like, if you can slow this team down, you can beat them. But you know what? Golden State, they jack up shots pretty quickly in the shot clock as well. So that gives the other team a lot of chances to score. And I think they're in the bottom half of the playoffs in terms of opponents' points per game, whereas the Raptors are holding opponents to less than 100 points a game, I think, throughout these playoffs. So if the Raptors can slow them down, it works in their favor. But they're going up against a team that, kind of like the Phoenix Suns when Nash was there years ago, we're going to let you score 105. We're just going to score 115. And And I think that's the way the Golden State Warriors are going to play through this. It's I don't think it's the defense that's going to stop the Raptors as much. It's not going to be as important as the Raptors stopping and limiting Golden State on the other end, right? Like the Golden State's going to score. Can you score more than them? And I think that's where the Raptors need to be sure that they get over that 100-point mark. And it's going to be very important because we know that Golden State's going to get at least 100.
Okay, Blair, I'll give you one more to you. We know the Raptors have been the second best home team in the playoffs, outscoring their opponents by 12.5 points per 100 possessions, and they're 8-2 at Scotiabank Arena. We also know, however, that Golden State are the best road team in the playoffs, outscoring their opponents by 7.5 points per 100 possessions on the road. They've gone 6-2 on the road, and in every single series in this 5-year dynasty span of Golden State, they've won at least one game on the road. Games 1 and 2 are at home. Do Raptors hold home court?
I think they do. I actually think that they're going to hold home court. I think they're going to get a reverse Bucks, and they're going to home cold court and then lose. But I do think they will win the first 2 games. I just think the fanfare is just such a wave right now, and it's hard to see. It's hard to see that not giving the Raptors the edge. One question though I don't know if do you guys think it matters that Curry won't necessarily feel as away as he does in a lot of other cities? Like he lived here for a long time. I don't know if that matters or not.
Does he eat an Uber for free while he's here or no?
Yeah, true. But because I wonder if it matters. Like, and also his wife grew up here as well, right? So like before they even met. So it's I don't know if this is and does that matter at all? These are those little infinitesimal things we like to look at and overanalyze when we're looking at the finals. He was already testing out these rims like 20 years ago when he was a kid, right?
Yeah, that's where it all began, right? Absolutely.
But no, I do think the Raptors have an edge. I mean, like I said, coming to America is coming here. But the only other thing I would say is, one, that it's just Golden State and their talent can trump anything, and 2, there's some ways that they can parlay this along with Klay Thompson's chip on his shoulder about the All NBA voting. There's a way they can parlay that into a chip on their shoulder too. All this Toronto attention that's being had.
Yeah,
they've also been off for
there's that too. The rest and rust. Yeah,
there's that resting rust that comes with it. We're the idea that we're the favorite, the idea that we don't think this team can hang with us, and I'm not sure they're taking the Raptors serious enough. And I think it's vitally important that the Raptors make a statement in Game 1, not only to really shake the core of Golden State, but to set their own confidence up, right? You can't have the same thing that happened with Orlando. You can't let Golden State come into your building and beat you on Game 1. You need to come in and make a statement, right? You need to show that, and I think a lot of this is you need to believe it too, right? We belong here, and we can beat you.
And the one nice thing for those Raptors fans out there, the hardcore ones, is if I'm wrong and they do go out and lose Game 1, they've done that before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. I think maybe we'll end it right here. We've gone for an hour, so it's been a good little chat. We've gone over a whole bunch of ideas. I mean, maybe we'll save the Kawhi stay or go for another day, because the truth is no one knows but Kawhi, and he's not telling anybody what he's doing, and it's really irrelevant.
If I could, Steve, though, let me give a shout out to my good friends at Tequila Bookworm that are doing the Kawhi and Dine.
All right.
At 15 Queen West. Everybody go check them out. A nice little cozy bar with good late night food.
All right, there you go. There's a shout out from Blair. Any other shout outs, Blair? That anything else you want to promote before or just no? That's it.
No, that's good.
Where can people find you around these days if they want to hear more of you?
I'm still on Twitter at TF Quarter. TF Quarter podcast is currently on hiatus. It's one of my favorite words in the English language, hiatus. I don't know if we'll be back anytime soon, but I'm still tweeting and can be reached there.
Okay, and Mike, what about yourselves?
The only other thing that I want to say is that we ended up trading Bruno for Malachi Richardson, of which we only got 23 games for, and then we ended up trading him to the 76ers this year for cash. And We missed out on a lot of players because of that, and we took a lot of heat here on Raptors Republic because of how we dealt with that.
That's 2 trades away from being 2 trades away.
He's 2 trades away from being 2 trades away from actually being ready. So, you know what, Raptors fans, longtime listeners, you know what, you were right to grill us at the time, but I think at the end we showed why, you know, we weren't completely wrong.
True. Yeah. Besides that, okay though, you know, there's been some good moves since then. We'll give him credit for that. Mike, what about tell people about your latest book that just came out?
So I actually just published a book. So if you want more information on sports in Africa, so I've edited a collection. It's called Sports in Africa: African History, Politics, and Identity Formation. From the publisher is Routledge. So you guys can check that out. I have a chapter in there in sort of my new topic in history, which is actually the history of ping pong in colonial Nigeria. So you can check that out.
There you go. There you go. So, I mean, and Mike, if people want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Unfortunately, right now, kind of like Blair, I'm in the middle of sort of a hiatus as getting my life together. But here's hoping that, you know, the Raptors Republic fans like sort of what we've done here with bringing back the Worldwide Roundtable. Maybe we can do this again in the future and continue talking, because this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we've done it without, of course, the brain from the South, Greg Mason, who's he's in Pennsylvania these days, you know, but unable to join us this evening. And if you've enjoyed it, you know, listeners, please feel free to leave some comments and let us know. And if you know, if there's a positive feedback and people like it, I'm sure we can maybe make time to do something like this again. I'm Steve Gennaro. Originally, I was Phdsteve back when we started this whole project many years ago, Raptors Republic, and it's been beautiful to watch it grow. I want to give a shout out before I go off here. I mean, I talked about Zarar and Sam, for those of you who don't know, Arsenalist and or what's his handle now on Corner Sniper and Raps fan or whatever, you know, because they were the guys that really started it way back in the day with Scott as well. So a shout out to sort of the originals of Raptors Republic. But along the way, there's been so many incredible people who have helped Raptors Republic grow. And I mean, to watch it now and to see the site now, I mean, I won't be able to tell you all of them and give all of them credit, but I mean, certainly, you know, you know who you are if you've been there. But I do want to give a very particular shout out to Blake. And to all the work that he did. And at a very important moment, Blake stepped in and took over Raptors Republic. And so much of what you see and have now is thanks to him. And even though he's moved on, he's at the Athletic. You know, I think that Blake Murphy is just he's amazing. And I personally am very thankful for all the work that he did for Raptors Republic. If you want to catch me, I'm at _S Gennaro. I cover soccer significantly more than I cover anything else, as I have for the last, you know, I'd say 4 or 5 seasons. But I still do a little bit of basketball tweeting every now and then and some other sport as well. Feel free to give me a follow if you want. And if not, that's okay too. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I hope the Raptors go on to win the whole thing. And I hope there's a big party, even if I'm on the other side of the world and won't get to enjoy it. And until next time, Raptors fans, peace.
I don't know. Either I'm off my nut or he is. Or you are. Is that your final answer?
Damn, I'm good! Can you feel that? Huh? Can you feel it, Captain Compost? I can hardly contain myself.
You know, before this is over, I'm gonna need a whole lot of serious therapy. Man, I'm tired of being right.
Inconceivable!